That's very true. And having gotten off to that start, how about if we pray before we go on?
That would be great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful God, we come to you towards the end of this day and all that it's brought, the good and the hard, the blessings and the challenges. And we just invite you to be here with us. And I ask that you be present, very present with Linda in her home, and that you continue to guide and uphold her during this really challenging time. And we just pray. And we ask you to hear us as we look to your word for guidance and support. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 So Kelly, did I get the impression from something you said, maybe it was on your devotion, that you're back to work?
I am.
Same company?
It is. It was, and it's okay that this is public because it was a very humbling experience. I had been working at this advertising firm for 12 years. I'm going on 13 now. Great place. I have a great boss. And over the years, he has allowed me to be super flexible. To make a long story short, I was down to 1 day a week, which I loved before the pandemic. Dan was gone literally all the time, traveling. And so with two 17-year-olds, it was beautiful and I appreciated it. But when the pandemic hit, they had a big layoff and the boss called me and said, we're going to include you as part of that. And it was humbling, but it made sense. I totally got it. But then I started back at the end of September. So I'm now, I'm wanting to go probably a little more than I am right now. I'm 2 days a week now. But that is actually working out great because I do an awful lot with my mom and dad during the week. So if it stays 2 days, that will probably be a blessing as well. I remember calling Pastor Sherry when it all happened, and I just said, I feel like I've lost my identity. And she said the most perfect thing. She said, your identity is in Christ, and you need to not feel like you've lost a thing. So it's, and it gave me great empathy. I thought I had empathy before for people that have lost their jobs, but it definitely gave me great empathy. And, and then I had COVID. I said, I'm just experiencing this whole pandemic. Like, I don't know what's next, but like if it happens in the news, it's going to happen to me. So.
And I'm happy. I think one of the times that we talked, which would have been before you went back to work, you didn't know what was going to happen. And so
I must have told you. Yeah.
And I just didn't know that you'd gone back and whether it was the same place. And I sort of peeked into the devotions for a few minutes. And so I heard you talk about turning your son's room and Jack's room into your office and devotion place. And so when I heard that you was your workspace, I was like, wait, I need to ask about this.
It's lovely. I'm sitting right in front of the window. I can see the neighborhood. I'm not going to want to give it back. He comes back at Thanksgiving.
You're just going to lend it to him.
That's right.
That's why Roy's doing mine in the basement.
One of the blessings and challenges twice, I got a message from Adrian. Let me check. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's okay.
There's two different settings in terms of this layout, and typically what would happen is that once we went to live stream, people would be able to hear you but only see me. And right now they're seeing all three of us, which Adrian said isn't a problem as long as it's what we want. And that's kind of up to the two of you in terms of whether you're okay with it.
I'm fine with it.
I'm okay. As long as Jack's not watching. If he is, hi, Jack.
when I was the first time I was appointed to a church in Rochester in Penfield, it was kind of at the tail end of the demise of Kodak. Was largely the worst of it had passed, but the victims were everywhere. And all of us, okay, hold on. Just doing what the boss tells me. Because he knows what he's talking about.
He sure does.
Way better than I do.
He's awesome.
He really is. He's a gem.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So there were so many people who had lost their jobs. And then a number of years later, after being I left there to be a superintendent, and then I came back to south of Rochester after being a superintendent. And so now it's well past and the economy has improved, but there are still people who had either retired or had worked their whole lives with Kodak. But at Penfield, there was a man who literally found his ministry with other men who had lost their identity, who had, they were the primary providers for their families, and they didn't know what it would be like to not have a job and not be able to support their family. And so he had gone through that and had found a job. And so he began this really intentional ministry of seeking out men who were going through these experiences to help them, because they're men. And he taught me a lot. Not that I probably didn't know it before, but I had no need to articulate it. That for many of us, our identity is in what we do. The difference with women is that we also claim as our identity mothers and providers in our own right, but it's a very diverse sense of identity. Whereas men, surely they're fathers if they are, and husbands, but they're not wired in terms of our culture for their identity to be too far away from what they do and how they provide. And my own father went through a period of unemployment, and I began to realize that how frequently when we meet people, men or women, and we say, well, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And when what you do is laid off or unemployed or whatever it is, that can create some shame. So how do we rework the conversation around, you have Sherry saying your identity is in Christ, which is the truth for anybody who's a person of faith. It's not necessarily what the world says.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Pastor Tom always had a funny story. I don't think there are places in the Villages, but he talked about the Villages down in Florida. And he said, if you go from being employed and everybody says, what do you do, to down in the Villages, everybody says, what do you play? What's your card game? What's your card game of choice? What do you play?
That's right. And that, there's a more recent kind of ball that they play.
Pickleball, maybe.
Pickleball.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's good to meet you. Do you play pickleball?
Right.
In their golf carts and things like that. So we're going to spend this evening in Hebrews 11, which is probably one of the best known because it has the litany of the saints, the story of all the faithful. And so we're going to get there just as we did last week, but we're going to start by looking at ourselves. And as we think about how the writer of Hebrews decided on these people. We know there could be way more, but these are the people. They were great people of faith. So the question I want to pose to you is, what how do you define faith? What if you faith is what?
Trust in God.
Mm-hmm. Believing in something you can't see. Just confidence.
Mm-hmm. I think the belief that God exists, without proof, like you said, very much. So the next question about what is faith is, what does faith look like? If you think about people that you know that you consider to be sort of some of the people that you think are people of great faith, what are the characteristics that make that the case?
I always talk about peace that passes understanding. I always believe my father always has had that, and as a young person, I was wrestling with a lot of things, and I just would think of, he doesn't have the most glamorous life, but he has this peace that I believe is from God. Yeah, that passes.
So what characteristics does he have that show you that? How do you know?
Yeah, he's just comfortable with himself, I think, and probably a lot of that comes with age too, but just a trust that things will work out, and that there's a bigger plan, and things might be hard at a certain time, but that in the end it's all worth it, and Jesus wins and we win.
And I think you can sometimes just feel that from people that feel that sense of they're not worried about tomorrow in the way that some people are worried about tomorrow. They're true to themselves, true to their values. So what else? Linda, did anything come to mind?
My dad came to mind. He was always very wise, man of few words, but when he spoke, you listened. And also, my sister-in-law, who passed away from ALS last year, she was the ultimate. If there was a picture of the fruit of the Spirit, Linda's face would be there.
Wow.
That was just her.
Yeah.
Peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, all the way through. Self-control. Yeah. And all through her ALS. My brother said up until she couldn't smile and literally couldn't smile anymore, she was smiling and laughing and joking. Yeah. And just always had that faith. Always had that trust and knew where she was going. Without a doubt.
It's pretty beautiful. I think some of the people that I have known, and there are too many to count, and I think that I don't think it's a disadvantage necessarily that they're not in my family. And that in terms of, I don't have anybody that was near to me growing up who could show me that. But it also meant in some ways, because of my eagerness to find it, I saw it in so many other people along the way. And they just, that sense, like you said, Kelly, I know people who, they know who they are, they don't apologize for who they are. They don't think less of themselves, but they don't build themselves up in front of people. They're the same person of faith that you would see in their backyard as in their front yard or at church. And that their presence is open. Presence is open for other people because their own stuff isn't taking up so much room inside of them that they're open to whoever's in front of them. And I think the ability to hold that it comes from faith. It comes from, I don't have to worry whether somebody likes me or of course, the one woman who comes to mind, there wasn't anybody who didn't like her, because there wasn't, even when she talked about the times when she got mad at her sons, she had polio and she was confined to a wheelchair. And so she ended up doing most of the work raising her 4 sons, because her husband traveled, and people would be like, oh, I can't believe that she has to raise these boys by herself. Oh, she was a woman of great grace and openness, but she could wrangle those boys like nobody's business. They were smart enough to know to be afraid.
Right.
She would get them into their bedrooms, so they'd be on their bed and her wheelchair would be there, and there was no getting away from the conversation, which would lead to prayer, and all would be well. But she was an amazing woman. Have you ever heard a speaker or a person, preacher, motivational speaker? It doesn't even, sometimes there's a person who speaks that you feel the faith, even if they don't articulate it, but that someone who moves you or has moved you.
Let's see, there's Patsy Claremont, there's Lucy Swindoll, who passed away, by the way.
Oh, did she? I
Yeah.
knew she was hovering.
Today or yesterday. All those, Angie, is it Angie Smith?
Okay, yeah.
Her husband is in Selah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
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 Lori Jagow at times too, just the way she tells her testimony and her story of her son.
Yeah. Some of the people, some of the big speakers and performers and things like that, that we see as models of faith, we don't actually know how they live their lives. We don't know how genuine it is. And in recent weeks, I've heard of 2 very significant music people who have fallen from grace. And it's one of them is David Haas, who wrote Here I Am and Be Not Afraid. And that was just devastating to me. And the other one is Chris Rice.
Really?
I haven't heard either one of those. Oh.
So it's and the reason I bring them up is because it creates in us this turmoil. Wait, so we look at these mentors, these teachers, these leaders and guides who, whether they've written music or preached sermons or whatever, not talking about the names that you mentioned, Linda, that we sometimes find ourselves in a position of being so disappointed when we find that what we thought we saw wasn't what we saw, or what we saw was real, but it's a person who just fell, who just simply lost their way.
Right.
Yeah.
David did.
Yeah.
There are many in the Bible that we can see who lost their way. And so what are the kinds of life experiences that we might encounter that make us worry or wonder about our faith? We've talked a little bit about this before, but like wondering, do I believe? Am I sure I believe? How might we find ourselves not in a position of falling from grace like that so dramatically, but I think that we all fall from grace at least an inch or 2 on occasion.
Yeah, I think anytime, especially when somebody passes away, even if it's somebody not necessarily that close to you, it makes you confront your own humanity and think, do I know for sure where I'm going and that there is something beyond this life? It really does make you question.
Yeah. The first time I saw a dad carry this little tiny casket to a grave. There was, I didn't doubt my faith, but there was this, God, I'm telling you, you know, you better help these parents. You better be holding that baby. And I don't necessarily have any doubt, but I think there are some things that we see or experience that we just can hardly believe that it's real, that this kind of suffering happens.
Yeah.
So I think that there's I don't know if you remember this, but there was the story of the Chilean miners who were underground for 70 days.
Yeah.
And their shift supervisor, I wouldn't be able to pronounce his name, Louis Urzua, but I'm sure that's not how you say it. He underground organized, supported, encouraged, and prayed with and prayed for all of those miners to try to keep them not just from dying, which of course is very important, but to try to keep them from wanting to die, from keeping them in a place where they believed that they were going to be rescued. And we can imagine that for a couple of weeks. I mean, as awful as that might be, I mean, it took them 2 weeks to even find out there was anybody in there. And then all the more days that it took to actually get them out. But one of the things that they talk about in this story of those miners is that the feeling, we can't know the truth, but the feeling above the ground was that once they got any clue that there were people there that were alive, they never gave up thinking that they would eventually get to them and help them to get out. And that the people in the mine, as weak and in bad condition as they were, primarily this shift supervisor, can you imagine? I mean, you're just in charge of the shift. You're just doing your job. And then you end up being in that position. And I'm guessing that there were times when they doubted.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't doubt God, but I'm guessing they might have doubted that they were going to survive. Or if they prayed to God to be rescued and they were still there the next day, that mindset of, I believe for 70 days. I consider that to be a pretty remarkable testimony. I'm guessing that there are other stories that are different in some manner where it doesn't have a happy ending and people believed and they believed and they believed. I always think about, when I think about 9/11 and I think about the people who knew they weren't going to survive, and that sense of they know this is going to happen. It's going to happen. And that sense of we can't know. I believe. We can only hope and pray that was the reassurance they had as they saw things unfold. And we can think of a number of other circumstances. I was telling Sherry when we were looking at confirmation that around the Columbine shooting many years ago, one of the earlier big ones, there was a young woman who died, but the understanding, first of all, she was a Christian, and that her sort of last moments were still moments of faith.
Yeah.
And so there was a whole campaign among the Christian community, say yes.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
I do, yeah.
So
I do too.
we changed up our whole confirmation to be the service itself, and the last few weeks to being say yes. To the parents, to the kids. And I think that that it was kind of like that moment of that we don't know. We don't know what we're promised. We don't know what could happen outside on the curb or whatever. So say yes when you have the chance. Hopefully a genuine yes, but just such powerful stories of life and death, and we hope and trust resurrection, not physical resurrection here, but resurrection in with God and with that healing.
That was such a powerful story. I remember like questioning myself, would I be as strong as this young girl was? Because I think the gunman gave the impression that if you said no, he would spare your life. And if you said yes, he would kill you. And I thought,
right.
I truly hope that I would say yes. I say I will say yes, but yeah.
It's we hope that we won't be put in that position. And I think it's okay to be inspired by others who are trusting that we most likely won't ever be in that position. But I think it's a very helpful question to ask ourselves, not in a blaming or I couldn't or I wouldn't, but that reassurance of I hope, I pray that I would say what was true and honest for myself. I don't know.
Yeah.
So part of what we're going to do is, first of all, we're just gonna go through Hebrews 11, just looking at it, not reading it, just kind of taking your eyes down and take turns saying the names of the people that are listed here. And so there may be some that might be at the beginning of the sentence and their name's really clear. There might be some that are later that we might miss, but we'll catch them all. Are you all right with that?
Yep.
I'm gonna start, and Abel,
Enoch,
Noah,
Abraham,
Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah. Sarah,
I think that's okay. Joseph, we already said, did we say Abraham?
Yep.
But okay, so, and then there's Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, okay, Moses.
I don't see his name, but Joshua, because of Jericho falling.
Jericho's right. Jericho's listed.
Good one. And Rahab, the prostitute, Rahab.
Yep. And then
Gideon,
Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel.
And the prophets.
Based on just what you know about the ones you're familiar with, are you familiar with all the names?
I think so. Yeah. I'm trying to. Yeah.
Which of the ones that are listed here do you think face the most adversity in their struggle to be faithful? And some of that might depend on how you define struggle or adversity.
Joseph, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm thinking Abraham.
I was just going to say Abraham being
Yeah.
asked to leave his land, and
Well, and sacrifice his son.
yeah,
Um,
That's that's the biggest one.
that's yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, Noah had to risk all the ridicule and all these things, but I think there's not much that tops, trying to kill your own son and thinking God told you to do it. Yeah. Let's see. Moses's parents, it's interesting, like they're listed in verse 23, not just Moses, but his parents.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And the hidden by his parents for 3 months because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because they could have been killed
Mm-hmm.
for keeping.
All 3 of them.
Yeah.
They, when I think about what Moses endured trying to lead the people to the promised land, when we think of some of the ridicule and the heckling sort of that Noah got when he was building the ark, oh my gosh, putting Moses in charge of a people and having to take them that far. And we sometimes make light of the whining and, we'd rather die. And you'd sort of think of this almost humorous,
Right.
because it gives you the impression of sort of spoiled people who don't have enough food and they don't da 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 da. But truly, it likely had to be an incredibly, incredibly hard journey. The risk of taking them through the Red Sea,
Right.
and it's and not even making it. He didn't even make it, but.
Right.
The people that we talked about earlier, when we talked about the people we named, and we look at some of these people, not everybody got to finish what they were called to do. Not everybody got to rest in that place of faith and accomplishment, and that they might have done everything God asked them to, but then they died. Just look at the disciples and some of the deaths that they endured after being so faithful. And obviously that story wasn't written yet, because you could imagine that if it was a story that was written after the lives of the disciples, you would surely hope that they would be on this list. And so what do you think the rationale is of them, of this listing of all of these people?
I think encouragement very much, that like we even do today, if they can do it, you can do it. Just as an example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And remember
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I don't want to
move
the conversation.
And it also, remember your roots.
And I think that's a very powerful, that sense of, I didn't come from right here. I did not begin on the day that I was born. One of the things that there were some bishops in some eras of ordination that when you were ordained, I missed it. My husband got it, but I missed it, was they would go from your ordination. So it would go from me to Bishop Stith, to Bishop Yakel, and then go all the way back to one of the apostles. Now, how they do that, I don't know. But this person posted a picture of it on Facebook recently when they were going through things. And I think that one of the things that we sometimes have to be reminded of is our reach, that we came from someplace, and that it may be, you know, both of you talk about your fathers, but where did they come from, and where did that person come from? And you can just I'm not a person who has a lot of interest in genealogy for genealogy's sake. I leave that to my son, who, when we did all the 23andMe and all the contacts and everything, it's like, talk to Jordan, talk to Jordan, talk to Jordan. But what does interest me are the stories of, and ultimately what interested me were where the stories of faith. Where can I follow how far back can I follow the journey of faith in my family? And it kind of zigzags, because I was able to observe in my generation and their parents, on both my mother's and my father's side. You could almost at a glance, you could see which families were people of faith. They had their struggles with children and things that happened, even addiction and death, but there was just a difference. There was a solidness in their family, that no matter how off things happened, it was still there. And I can remember my mother's family. There was none of that to be found. Couldn't find it, not biologically, much of anywhere. And then there's, of course, Matt's family. And so some of the decisions about why are we who we are? And then I look across at all these people that I'm related to, and I can see faith. I can see faithful people, not perfect people, but people of faith in the way they live their lives. And, you know, my father's mother was the daughter of a Methodist minister, but she bailed on all of it. He was preaching, and back then you preached against drinking and dancing and smoking and jewelry and gambling. You know, you couldn't do anything. And she, at a pretty young age, decided to do everything. And she married my grandfather on a dare. He was a single school teacher, and I'm guessing she was pretty outgoing and rowdy, and I'm guessing that some people dared her, you know, see if you can get that school teacher. And she didn't find whatever journey she might have been on, she never found happiness or peace or even consolation. But then there's her father, and there's her father's sister or brother that I know or knew. And you could sort of zigzag around. And I found that to be just a wonderful story, in terms of, it's not all happy, it's not all pretty, but if you can find the stories, then you can go back and find maybe who was a part of my faith that I never even met because of these generations.
Right.
Do either of you know where your dad's, your father's sort of faith story came from?
Mine is definitely my dad's mom, my grandma Holmes, and she was just, the most faithful woman. And I didn't always like what she said, but I think because, I loved her, but I remember, you know, a couple of times in high school when I would achieve something, she'd say, you know, I hope you don't get conceited about that.
Like, just give me a minute. Could I just have a minute?
Grandma, okay, thanks. And go ahead.
Did you ever say that to either of your children?
No, I told them that story, you know, I just wanted her to say good job. I've always been a people pleaser, but The funniest story in our family about her is she and my grandfather made something for the last Christmas dinner that we were all together. I think it was bread pudding, and they forgot an ingredient like a baking powder or something, but they apparently together had decided that was never to be spoken of, that it was going to taste okay. It was great. And so we all were together, and it ended up being her last Christmas. And my grandfather, who could be a pistol, said, I'm glad you guys really like it because there's no baking powder in it. And she said, Clifford, you are. And we were like bracing ourselves, we're like, oh, our sweet little grandmother. And she goes, lower than the ants. And she walked out of the room. And then she came back and cried and apologized because she had said he was lower than the ants. Like that was the worst thing that she could think of. My brother always says the rest of us had a whole lot of words going through our head, but she couldn't think of them, and it was her father, whose last name was Nutt, Walter Nutt. My dad's named after him. The Nutt family, N-U-T-T, that's my nuts. But it was him who was really, he wasn't a minister. I feel like there's a minister in his background, but he was just a really
Somebody's ringing my doorbell.
Yeah. Oh, that's Linda, that's Jack calling me on FaceTime.
Oh.
While I'm in this room.
Yeah, right. Better not answer that. Oh my goodness. I wondered if that was your doorbell or hers.
Yeah, that was a perfect doorbell sound, wasn't it? It was like Avon calling. Ding dong.
Doesn't sound like that.
Yeah, mine doesn't work half the time.
There, but that's okay.
She probably wants to hear when she comes back about like your dad, how your dad became a minister. I don't want to make you tell it twice, but I'm curious.
Yeah, that is kind of a funny story.
uh,
I don't really remember. Well, my granddad passed away before I was born. My dad's dad.
Uh-huh.
Kevin and Sue were little when he passed away.
Oh.
And I should probably just wait a minute, but
yeah.
I think my grandparents went to Salem in Tonawanda.
Oh, okay. United Methodist? Is that United Methodist?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
My doorbell, only time it ever rings is when somebody's dropping a package, and they usually, if they ring the doorbell at all, they just ring it and go.
Right.
So I wasn't going to go, but then when it rang again, it was actually Autumn Kraft who thought that her parent, something that was hers, had come here, and that I might have it, but I don't. And so it's like I haven't seen Autumn. I haven't seen her in a long time, and it was like, "Hi, I gotta go."
I'm so sorry.
She said, "Tell the church." She could see that I was on the computer. She said, "Tell the church I said hello."
Aww.
So,
that's so
she
sweet.
looks good. She looks really good.
Oh, good.
Yeah. She's a sweetie.
So, did you talk about your family at all, Linda?
I started, but I stopped. I said, my dad's dad passed away before I was born. And if I remember correctly, because my grandmother, my dad's mom, I was in high school when she passed away. I think she was a Christian Scientist for many years.
Interesting.
But my dad and his brother were both raised Catholic. And my uncle was always, I'm going to be a priest, I'm going to be a priest. And my father, his very first time at confession, and the priest, I don't remember exactly how it came about, but he left the confession booth and said to himself, how does that priest know what's in my heart? And he turned his back on God. And was a proclaimed atheist for a long time. And when my younger brother was little, my dad joined the Army and moved to California. And my mother followed him out. and they were there was a Lutheran church out there having a seminar on creation. So they went to argue for Big Bang, evolution, and atheism. Well, Jesus said, not tonight.
They came away
And they gave
converted.
their lives.
Ah.
Yeah. They accepted Christ that night. And it was a couple more years down the road when my dad was spending all of his time at the Lutheran church down in Wellsville, I believe it was. And my mother said, "You're always at that church. You're never home with me." Well, it just so happens I love God more than I love you. My mother said, "So then why don't you go be a pastor?" He said, "I will." And that was the end of the story.
Wow. We know that we're supposed to love God more than we love our families.
But we're not supposed to tell them that.
We're not supposed to say that.
I always had a hard time with that at times, but I have come to realize that it's the truth, but it's hard to, you just don't want to emphasize it with those.
Yeah, you don't want to articulate it. Yeah. Yeah. But obviously we're married almost 54 years, but
wow.
And I think I was telling Kelly, I think that my mom's parents belonged to Salem in Tonawanda. So, but I'm really not sure what all.
See, and I think
further back than that.
The other part of this is I happened to start it by talking about my actual physical family and ancestry and faith. I think that probably before I came to that revelation, actually I was already in ministry by then. I was looking into my this grandfather great grandfather who'd been a pastor. But in the meantime, the people of faith who influenced me directly, who were my faith family, even though they were not biological, that offers yet a different set of stories about who are the people and how are we influenced by some of these people that aren't even related to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that we can look at our story, and I think that sometimes people might not find anything, no matter where they look in their family. They might not find the heroes of faith or the influence or the inspiration. Chances are good they wouldn't be looking if they didn't already have some. Mm-hmm. And I think that we talk sometimes about there's our family by blood, and then there's our family that we make our family. And for me, most of those people have come out of relationships in a faith community. So it's an interesting thing to think about when we think about the legacy. And we think about the heroes and how they understood God's plan. And I dare say that when we read through this list, if we ask them, if they could come be present with us now, and we ask them, did you understand what it was that God was trying to accomplish? I'm not sure that they certainly would have only understood, because they're all Old Testament. They would have only understood the hint, the spark of a promise, but not the reality. I love watching your dog.
I know. I'm so sorry.
No. I really like it. I went to Linda's house and got a cat fix, and now I'm watching your dog and getting a dog fix. My back itches. I got to roll around. And so because we have this building story through the Old Testament, and you can find in the gems in the Old Testament of where the promise of Jesus is mentioned, probably way more than I've ever found. I'm guessing it's because we have the whole Handel's Messiah, it's all built on the proclamation of Jesus coming, but Jesus wasn't Jesus yet, that we can know. And so many other, that's a piece of music, but it comes obviously from scripture.
Right.
So many other places that there's the promise of Jesus, but not how it's going to happen, or not any expectation that would happen in any of their lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
But the legacy was still there. It's just that they didn't know all of it, because when we look at it, this one commentary says, many of the earlier heroes grasped only a small part of the plan. Abraham hoped for family and land, Moses for freedom and a homeland for his people. And then it grew. By the time David assumed the throne, the prospect included a royal dynasty, which became the basis for Israel's hope in the Messiah. Mm-hmm. So you can see how it builds, and yet they didn't know. They didn't know or weren't able to experience Jesus. And so we think about, even when we look at this story and we look at what we've read in Hebrews, and we're still only looking at the beginning of the story that we know. Mm-hmm. We're yes, we know the Old Testament to a great extent, but the Jesus story was just getting started when we read these words from Hebrews. And I think that God was sort of now kind of birthing this whole new thing in these people who had heard the good news of Jesus Christ. And we think about when the author says, when he talked about when in verse 40, God provided something better for us so that they wouldn't be made perfect without us. That's what mine said. What does yours say? Something like same thing. Since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Right. It seems like we know by reading this and doing those study that we know that the people were bailing or thinking about. Some had already bailed out of Christianity. Others were on that sort of iffy place. I imagine, of course, we glamorize it. I imagine what must it have felt like to be there at the ground at the birth of the Christian church. And I think exciting and energy in the Holy Spirit, when what we know is that it was a very difficult life and they were often persecuted. Mm-hmm. But I still would love to be able to watch a part. Yeah. If there was something that Jesus did, what story would you love to put yourself in and actually physically see? Wow. I just thought of that question. That's an amazing question. Wow.
Gosh, yeah.
The first story that comes to my mind is the woman with the issue of blood. And I don't know if I can say why, but that's because there was revelation was sort of Jesus was amazed, just like the woman was amazed, and how long she had been faithful. And there's the dedication and the hardness, the hard life that she had experienced. And as one author puts it, she did what she had the power to do, which is to get to Jesus and touch him. She couldn't, so many things she couldn't do.
His hem? Is she the one who touched his hem?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was, I don't know if that would be the one I'd stay on, but that's the first one that came to mind.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the one where he, let him without sin throw the first stone. I think adulterer, largely because I'm still so intrigued by what he might have been writing in the dirt. And
somebody take a picture.
Yeah, right.
and they tell us so much, but purposefully God didn't reveal that, so or didn't leave it as a permanent record for us to know. But maybe there's purpose in the unknown, that we can each interpret it the way. But I would love to be there and see what he was writing. People, I think you probably know so much. I'm sure you know so much more. One of the commentaries that I read said something about, perhaps he was listing the sins of some of the men around, or, I don't know what else.
I don't know. I think that, and I think that people can speculate all they want, but I don't think anybody that we know of really knows for sure. And we can't prove it now, but I think about him writing their names for the sins, because how would he know their names? Or did he write? It's hard to say. I think the sins, he probably would have needed some time for that. But anyway, I think we can think of all kinds of things that he might have written there.
When did one come to you?
Two came to me, of course, Lazarus. Just the emotion that Jesus went through himself. He wept. He cried. He loved Lazarus.
Yeah.
Even though he knew what he was going to be doing, he still had that empathy for Mary and Martha and all those around. And the other one was when he gave the widow her son back. So they're both resurrection stories. I just think of the one Casting Crowns song that they do about, it's a song about Peter, but that was then and this is now, and how I saw you do all these things. I saw a dead man take his breath. How could I deny you? How could I be the man I was before? I like Casting Crowns.
Yeah, I like some of their music too. And I think that it's when we think about the faith of these early heroes, who ultimately were heroes of an incomplete faith, and yet they and their stories were what God wanted us to hear. They were to be known and to be listed as the heroes in the biblical story in the Old Testament. And I also have to believe that the people listening would have known those names. They would have known those stories. If they had been faithful Jews, they would have known these stories. And so by bringing up people that they know and how great their faith was, of course, I'm not sure how that convinces someone to leave Judaism, but he's connecting. The author is connecting. I know what you know, and I know that that's not the end of the story. So he's kind of bringing them, once again, kind of reeling them in with, I get it, but that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is the good news of Jesus Christ. Don't give up. And I think that people for all these hundreds and thousands of years are still inspired by these same Old Testament heroes. Why else would every vacation Bible school I've ever seen use the Old Testament? Because they do. Right. They so often, that Jesus is in there, but so often the stories are Old Testament. And I used to wonder, well, why is that? I don't really know, other than they make for better, maybe VBS.
Scenery.
There's
scenery. Better scenery.
Adventure. I mean, you don't read in the Gospels about people hiding in the mountains and people running and huge things happening, like people turning into pillars of salt and the Red Sea passing. You don't read that kind of stuff in the New Testament.
Yeah. So, and you can't talk about the water into wine.
No.
Yeah, no.
We talked about that when I went to youth group on Sunday evening to serve communion to them. And we did a different different. We did it the whole consecration, and we actually had real bread and real juice. But the liturgy that I used, it had included, because it's from Scotland, and it had included mostly wine instead of juice, or we talk about the fruit of the vine or whatever we want to call it. So I changed some of them, but I didn't change all of them. And something early on, one of the young men said something about, well, it's the wine. The wine is blood, right? And so, well, not exactly, but and so he was talking, and interestingly, as the conversation unfolded, I had the chance to explain to all of them that it did used to be wine, and that's what they would have been drinking at the table. And this particular liturgy made it clear that this was at the end of the meal. They'd already eaten. They'd eaten lamb. They'd probably eaten some vegetables. They'd had bread, and that this is what was left on the table, that they did communion. It wasn't a beautiful loaf that was just all perfect. It would have been what was left from the meal. And then I explained to them how it is that we came to have grape juice instead of wine, and helped introduce them to Mr. Welch, because Mr. Welch from Welch's Grape Juice was a big influencer in not drinking, no alcohol, use this grape juice.
Yeah. Wasn't he a Methodist too? Was he? Yeah. Yeah.
So it was fun to be. It was really nice to be with them.
I bet they found it fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. It was at the end of youth group, and so there was a certain amount of time factor, and then there was the hard copies. I didn't know that Adrian could put it up on the screen, or it would have taken me seconds to have emailed it to him, have him bring it up on the screen. But no, I'm up in the office copying, and things are, one side of the page goes that way, the other side of the page goes this way. But it was wonderful to be able to do communion and have it be a conversation, and also to be able to say, okay, who wants to read, and let them read parts of the consecration. So
That's awesome.
It is good.
So we think about in what does your Hebrews 12:1 say? We're not going to go into 12, but what does verse 1 say?
Therefore, go ahead, Linda.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith.
It could easily be verse 41 in Hebrews 11.
Yeah.
I mean, it does follow, obviously. If you're reading it, then you go to 1 in verse 12. But I think that chapter 11 is a great description of a cloud of witnesses.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's some of that is why the invitation for us to consider, who are our clouds of witnesses, and we're not at the end of our lives, so that we're not necessarily in that mindset where we're thinking about what we leave behind, but we can be aware of just how many people, biblical and real life and the written word, whether it's scripture or other places, that are a part of our cloud of witnesses, which then create this motivation to run the race with perseverance. Don't give up. Don't give up. You have all these people behind you. Don't give up. And I think that verse 1 in chapter 12, it's one of my very favorite, and it's one of my favorite ones to use to observe that a person had run their race. They had accomplished their call. They had followed the cloud of witnesses. Usually that would be in a funeral, but I also told someone today who they were talking about stubbornness, and I said, it sounds like the spiritual gift of perseverance, which of course isn't one of the listed spiritual gifts, but I'm sure it's implied in there. And that sense of, it's okay to give up for a minute. It's okay to recognize everything doesn't depend on me. Sometimes it's helpful if we recognize how little depends on us. Your fuzzy friend back there, he depends on you and Dan and your cats and things like that. But the well-being of the world does not depend on us. And in ministry, sometimes people will say, did I talk to you about baptism? About the baptisms I'm doing at the church?
Yes, you did mention that you're doing a lot.
Yes.
I'm trying to think what else.
As a ministry.
That it's changed. It's a change from the previous practice,
Yes.
which was
Really
membership and investment, which is it's not everywhere, but it's a relatively common practice. And I can remember being challenged about that, and I said, if even one person in all of those, that was about weddings or baptisms, I can't remember, I said, if even one of those people, even one, if their life is changed because the door opened and they came through it and they found their way to God, then isn't all of that worth it? Isn't it worth it?
Amen. Yeah.
I think
And
so.
especially I can say that because it's me doing the work. It's me doing the work with the couples and or the parents or whatever. So if it's, so it's easier for me to say that because it's my hope. And if it ever takes away from anything else that I'm called to do, then that's maybe a different story, but we're all called to different parts of the mission field.
Absolutely.
That's how I felt too when I was at Gowanda. If just one person in that congregation needed to hear the message that God had given me for that week, then I was doing what God needed me to do.
And if nobody says it, you just hope and pray that God will use whatever you said, because God will, and God did, in ways that we never even know about. And it's just something to behold. One of the things that there's a woman, Karen Armstrong, who wrote a book called The Spiral Staircase. And she notes that religion, like faith, is not about accepting 20 impossible propositions before breakfast, but about doing things that change you. Abraham got up and left home. Moses turned his back on royal privilege. Jesus laid down his life. In doing these things, they changed not only their own lives, but the world, and they moved us all a step closer to God's desire. Their models of faithfulness can help us live worthy lives and give us hope to reach the final goal that they saw only from a distance. And then we are called to keep going that same distance. And so if we went to each one of these people that are named and went back and read their story, we would not only read what they did in faithfulness, we would read what they walked away from. What did they have to do to be faithful? And I wish we also knew more about the lives that the disciples had before Jesus went around and called them. Some people will say that when Jesus called them, it didn't mean that they came by themselves. Some people will say that they brought their family, maybe not everywhere they went, but there's descriptions of the settings where you might think it's just the disciples, but it probably wasn't just the disciples. We don't know who those people are, but I would be interested, is that do we hold up their lives as individual people who follow Jesus, without ties, without connections? Does that have any influence on the celibacy of priests? I mean, I know Jesus is the primary thing because of the belief that Jesus was celibate. But what about the disciples? If they did in fact go by themselves, then that meant they abandoned their families or their homes, or maybe they didn't have them. I don't know. But I would like to.
I was going to say, we know Peter did, because didn't Jesus go and heal Peter's mother-in-law? Was it Peter?
I believe you're right. We know that Jesus had siblings that, however you want to call them, you can call them stepbrothers or whatever, but they're the siblings. We know that Mary and Joseph had other children. So the question is, what was the other choice? What was the other way? Have you ever been in a place in your life where you've looked back and said, if I hadn't found Jesus, if I hadn't come to faith, where might I be?
Yep, I have.
And a story for another day, but I'll tease you with it, is in college I dated a young man who was Mormon. I try to make it clear that at the time I dated him, he was not a practicing Mormon, but he was raised in a very strict Mormon family. And as a matter of fact, married one of my sorority sisters, and she became Mormon. But I often think about, that was probably like one of the bigger trials of my faith, just that I knew that was not for me. But it was so appealing. Right. He was so appealing because he had wonderful morals, and they really do. They're very disciplined people. There's a lot of good that goes with it. His family wanted to embrace me. It becomes like, a little group that they help you find jobs. They get you into schools. It's, mafia-esque, or, that's probably not great to say either.
Well, it's just a different culture.
Yeah. But they take care of their own. They really do. They certainly do, and that was what made him so appealing to me, but I went through it all. They had me go meet with the Mormon bishop, and it was just, that's what really solidified that, no, I am a Christian. This is not for me. As handsome as he might be, and as what wonderful morals he has, it's still not for me, So, it was a really interesting time. He was from Salt Lake City Mormon, so like really, really Mormon.
So when you met the Mormon bishop, did you go to Salt Lake City?
Yes.
Wow.
I was in Salt Lake to see his family, and they had me meet with him alone, which was really, I was 20 years old, and
I'd be terrified.
I was, it was the late 80s, early 90s, probably maybe 90. And I had on like long shorts and tights and a big jacket, and that was not appropriate. So his mother gave me a dress to wear. So I'm wearing his mother's dress. I'm sitting in this office talking to this like 60-year-old man. And the best thing was, I'm a big crier, but I did not want him to see me cry. And I tried to just be very, straightforward with him. And one of their tenets, as you probably know, is that they believe that marriage continues into heaven exactly as it is on earth. And so they say like marriage is forever. And he tried to really get me as a young woman, I say, because he said, don't you think that it's wonderful that Rob wants to marry you forever? Like forever, not just this earthly life. And I, with a deadpan face, I said to him, I just thought maybe we'd give it 50, 60 years trial basis. And he goes, I think we're done. And he sent me out.
Oh my goodness.
And then I burst into tears.
You were expelled from the bishop's office.
Yeah. And the women they were on one side of the church and the men were on the other. And I was a young college, very feminist young woman. And I was so mad. I'm like, what are those men discussing over there? Because we were discussing recipes and sewing and child rearing. And it was really something. It was a real window into totally different culture.
It's it's quite
Why did I bring that up? What did you ask that I brought that up for? I can't remember.
Oh, where would the path that we would have taken?
Oh, yeah.
That if we did not follow or find a path of faith, where might we have gone? Mm-hmm. So that's where that came from. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you know Reverend Sellers, the senior Reverend Sellers, Ron?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He was my parents' pastor at Northridge Church while all of this was going on. And they had me go to him too. And he was very wise to talk with. He was not as hard to speak with. He was just, he was
pretty soft and accessible kind of a person.
Yeah. It was an interesting time.
Yeah.
And I give my parents so much credit because they let me figure it out on my own. And to this day, I say to them, why didn't you say, like, what are you doing? And they said, we just knew that you would probably like him more if we forbid you or we told you that it was wrong. And I'm like, oh, I don't know that I'm going to have that restraint. As a parent, I'm going to be like, oh.
It's very difficult.
Yeah, it is.
Parent, and you watch your kids grow up, and I think we as people of faith who raise our children in the church, we have hopes we have a picture in our mind of what that's going to look like for our children, that they will find the person that they love and that they will find a church home or stay in the one they grew up in, something like that. And it's, I think as we talked about before, when Linda talked about how hard it is when your dad, you want to have your dad as a pastor and, things like that. And my kids used to be able to get away with saying that. They can't do that anymore. I haven't been their pastor in so long. But to stand back and watch them be on their journey. And, and as I said last week, to hear Sarah talking about God and to hear Jeff's mother talking about God. But if we push or we make it a thing, I think that maybe there's a sense that some of that feels okay because they know that we're pastors, but we didn't bring it up. They just know it's a safe topic.
Right.
I suppose I fortunately haven't been challenged with the idea that it's a safe topic that means that they could say terrible things. That would be really hard, but that's not what happened.
Yeah.
So. And Kelly, my mother, was the one to voice her opinion very strongly, which is probably why I made some of the decisions I made in my life, but is also why I might just say something subtle to Scotty and let it go and put it in God's hands. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's hard, but I have found that is what works best.
Yeah. I'm preparing myself to just let them let them find their way, you know.
I
Yeah.
think it's one of those places that where you are, Kelly, is then in that place that will continue to be a message is I was faithful and I did the best that I could. And you and Dan will be there for them always. And that's no matter where our children find themselves. I think that helping them to know, why are we so strong? What gives us the love that overcomes difficulties? They don't forget that, and they don't forget the church that birthed them into that experience. My oldest son, who might poo-poo some of the people in the church that he grew up in at Harris Hill as being kind of conservative and narrow-minded, and there certainly were people that were quite conservative, but they never didn't love him. They never, the children and the youth, just like in Pendleton, they grew up and they were loved no matter what. And so even in this recent hospitalization, they are the ones who sent him cards. Some of the ones. But when I suggested to a couple of people that being in there for 7 weeks, that it might be good if he got some mail, it was somebody from the Harris Hill Church who got right on it, because they know him. They've known him since he was 12. And so it's just, they might even reject it, but it's not gone. It's just a temporary not practicing.
Right.
Yep.
And that we don't know. Maybe there'll come a day when any one of our children, when some pastor in a virtual Bible study says, "What's your faith? Who are the heroes in your faith?" And oh my gosh, I hope that somehow, even if I'm in heaven, I have ears to hear that they looked back at us and said that we were part of what influenced them in their lives. They would say it now, but there's not some pastor other than me that's going to ask the question right now. So we're going to next week we'll do the last chapter of Hebrews, and so there's a couple of things that I just wanted to finish up with in terms of some direction. And one is there's sort of two parts. One is continuing, because I plan on continuing the Bible study no matter what it is that we decide, and no matter who's here. And we have a choice of going into another book of the Bible, or letter, or whatever it is that we feel so moved to do. And then the question is, for example, during Advent, do we want to do something that's more geared to Advent? Just putting it out there.
I'm very open.
I am too.
Yeah.
So you'll just go where I lead you?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
And I guess now I have an opinion, but I was thinking, there's so much about Advent in the services and things that maybe if there's something that is not, purely Advent focused, but that's a little bit, I think there's so much in the Bible that I don't know. I feel like I'm probably being overly confident, but the Christmas story and the build up and the Advent, I study a lot, but there's so much that I haven't studied.
And I think that makes perfectly good sense. Is there any book of the Bible that particularly intrigues you? Gospels or an Old Testament? I mean, just generally. You don't have to pick something, but what kind of neighborhood? I may decide something that's not what you say, but I'm just interested in what you have to say.
Linda, when you did I have not done the disciple classes, 1 or 2. When you did those, was there a book or books that you found, like, that you hadn't studied that you were really glad that you did, or?
it actually wasn't when I was doing disciple. It was when I was out at Gowanda.
Oh,
Part of the lectionary took us through parts of Job. And I always dreaded Job until I had to write sermons on Job. And then it's like, I think I get it now. I don't know that that's one that we would really want to get into in a Bible study, but and with disciple
maybe I think Job is very interesting. It maybe would be better when the world around us isn't in such a bad place.
Yes, right.
I told Pastor Terry I started reading Job when the pandemic began, and she said, "Oh my gosh, why would anybody want to read that during the pandemic?" I'm like, well, put it in perspective,
Right.
like
That's true.
It's also sometimes better if you read that out of the Message.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes books like that are easier to get through.
Yeah.
When you're reading from the Message, but
or even side by side,
Yeah.
to have to read an RSV or something, and to have some different
right.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, because part of the advantage of not going in the direction of Advent is that whatever we start doesn't have to either be interrupted or whatever, that we just go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Are the content, the questions, the exploration, is this kind of style helpful?
I like it.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
And Kelly, I'm enjoying being able to have a Bible study with you.
I know. I shouldn't probably say this publicly on the internet, but this would normally be choir time, 7 to 8:30. And I've never done a Bible study at church. So I'm selfishly enjoying it.
There are some of those things that we find ourselves having access to that we didn't before.
Right. Yeah.
So, all right. Well,
my dog wouldn't be here except that Dan is not here. She is tied to Dan with a very short leash. She adores him. And he went to go see a soccer game. A couple of the young men from our Bible study, I think he might have just come home. He has the most in tune ears. I don't exist when he's around.
But when you're around, then you're it, and he's not.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I offer God's blessing to both of you as you go out into this night, and whoever might be listening to us out there on the live stream, blessings, and it's good to be together.
Amen.
And I look forward to when we're together again.
Yes, amen.
All right.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.